Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the Industry Insight webinar series. The topic this time is how cloud computing can work for your firm. Speaking today will be Adam Citron from Adar IT. The Industry Insight webinar series is hosted by the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center. To stay updated on upcoming webinars or view previous videos, visit ambar.org/industryinsight. You can also stay updated on legal technology news through our blog, lawtechnologytoday.org. Adam Citron, Senior Cloud Computing Strategist at Adar IT, brings more than 14 years of successful IT strategy, sales, marketing, entrepreneurial, and managerial experience to an organization. He has a unique ability to explain complex IT concepts with a very non-technical method. Citron spends his time talking with business owners and C-level executives to cut through the confusing marketing mess of IT, and specifically the cloud, to provide clear-cut education and strategic direction. The presentation today will be followed by a Q&A. Please enter your questions into the question box in the webinar panel on the right side of your screen. All questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar, and we will be sending the video in a follow-up email in a few days. We will also post the video on our blog, which again is www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll now begin the webinar.
Thank you, Rose. Appreciate the introduction. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm gonna jump in and get started because we got a lot of good stuff to cover and only about an hour to do so. So as you saw on the invite, let me get this going. We have a couple of learning objectives that we're going to focus on here today. So we're going to talk a little bit about how private cloud differs from software as a service. We'll talk a little bit about what specifically software as a service is as well. How IT can become simple and effective, how you can evaluate cloud vendors, and we're going to talk about some of the internal questions that you really want to think about, talk about within your board, your partners, your team, to really understand if private cloud is best for your firm. So let's just jump right into it. You know, about 5-10 years ago, the idea of technology changes and advancements within law firms, as most of you all know, was about getting ahead in the game. That's not the case anymore. People are flocking to newer technologies, better technologies, for many reasons. We're going to talk a little bit about those trends. But today, you really need the additional technology just to even stay competitive. So I speak a lot with law firms, partners, managing partners down to administrators, COOs of all different levels through the ABA and other groups, and I hear and see a lot of these trends that are out there. And I want to quickly go over those because that kind of sets the path for some of the other stuff we're going to talk about. The first one is really important here, that IT is no longer just an IT issue. It used to be that IT was just tactical. It was just about machines, ones and zeros, data going through pipe or through wireless, and just kind of having those things work. It's much more complicated than that today, but can be simplified. And it's much more of a strategic decision and how technology can truly support a firm and some of the other pieces that we talk about here. Client acquisition, client service, and client retention is directly related to the technology that a firm has. We see and hear all the time that a client left one firm to go to another because they were more nimble. They were able to do the same work, but do it faster and more effective. And that's a way that, you know, people are pitching themselves to protect prospective clients, as well as being able to provide that level of service and keep them there. The same holds true for employees. It's not just about the millennials today. But you bring someone on to your firm and you expect them to bill X number of hours. You need to give them the support and the systems in order to be able to do so as easy as possible. If you're making their job harder, it's going to be harder to keep them, let alone acquire those new employees. People generally believe that IT is just complicated, most often because they don't truly understand it. But there are solutions today, and private cloud is one of those solutions that does help to simplify IT. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell everyone that simplify means that it's just the easiest thing ever. You'd never, ever have an issue, and it always just works, because that's just not the case. Things do break. But the goal of something like the private cloud is to reduce the issues as much as possible and significantly, as well as the cost, the support of it, et cetera. And IT resources. When it comes to IT resources, the big trend that we see is that there's a concern about the staff that they have. Are they the right people? Are they running around, firefighting versus being strategic and really bringing things to the firm that can really help the firm grow, add to the top line and the bottom line? Are they the right people? If I move to a cloud model, do I keep those people? What do I do with them? So there's a big trend on trying to figure out what that looks like. And then the final one here is truly a trend that we're seeing across the board, not just in legal, but a lot of people hear about the stories of hackers, and every day there's a new hacking that went on and data that was stolen. But in most of the cases, it wasn't necessarily an outside threat as it was as much an internal threat. An employee with bad password management, someone that wrote their password on a Post-it note and left it on the desk for the cleaning person to find and hand over to someone, or people stealing information and a system not securing them to not be able to do the things that they shouldn't be able to do. So those are kind of the things that we're seeing across the board. Now, what I want to jump into here is talking a little bit background of the different types of clouds that we see on there, so there's a good understanding of what that private cloud truly is. The three main types of cloud that we see out there are public cloud, hybrid cloud, and private cloud. A public cloud is really the most popular, what most people think of when they think of cloud. And that's what you call software as a service. That where you see on the little chart here, those are services where they're going to be less expensive. You go to a browser, you put in a URL, you put in a username and password, and now you get access to systems. There's all sorts of examples in the legal world, but I don't want to name any of those specifically. But you think of something generic like Gmail. Gmail is a public cloud software as a service. Obviously, that's free, but there's other services that are similar to it that are less expensive because all of the data, the information is on shared systems. So it's much easier to provide those services at a lower cost. You typically have limited or less security or security shared amongst many organizations. Compliance can always be an issue, and some sort of customization or programming may or may not be available depending on the solution. You're seeing it more and more available with more and more solutions. When you look at private cloud, the concept of private cloud is it's a dedicated environment, single tenant, so specifically to an environment. That might be an environment that's all hardware, they're dedicated just to you. It might be completely virtual, but the idea is that it's technically segregated for your company and your firm specifically. It's typically highly available. It's typically more customizable when it comes to compliance and security. So security needs specific to a particular firm or company. That's where the private cloud comes into play. So when I mentioned that software as a service or public cloud was the most popular, those really came to fruition first, and I'll put a quote unquote on that. Cloud's been around forever. It's just a marketing term that people are now using today, and in the last 5-10 years or so that people kind of understand the cloud means, hey, it's not sitting here in my office. So back when the cloud was the AOL of the day, you got your dial-up modem, you're dialing into a number, you hear that weird sound, and you were able to get to your information. It wasn't sitting there in your home or in your office. Then you got all sorts of new companies that popped up, from the Googles to the Amazons, that are providing all sorts of services, Dropbox and Box, and you have all of these different types of clouds that are out there. And then became a platform as a service, and desktop as a service, and infrastructure as a service, instead of just software as a service. And now it truly is cloudy and confusing as to what cloud actually means. So we focus a lot of this time on the education and the difference between the software as a service and these other platforms. But really for today, we're specifically talking about software as a service versus private cloud. So when you look at this model in this picture, we talked to a lot of firms that got really excited about the cloud, let's say 5, 10 years ago, and started to dip their toe in. So maybe it was hosting their email on, Office 365 through Microsoft or some other type of product. Maybe it was their document management system. Maybe it was case management, a little piece of this or that that they started to use. And what we find is that some organizations haven't done it at all. Some organizations said, wow, cloud is great. I'm going to save money. I'm going to need less staff. At least that's what they thought. And they started to utilize all of these different services. So they used to have control there in their office. Maybe they didn't have the right staff. Maybe they didn't just want equipment, and they thought software as a service was the model that they wanted to go to. Right now, we see a trend of the reverse, that we see people that have gone to all software as a service that are starting to pull back, not just in-house, but more to a private cloud environment, because they found that many different software as a service providers becomes more expensive and more risky, less control. That doesn't mean software as a service is bad. The goal of today is not to say one is bad and one is great, but to make sure that everyone's educated on what the risks are. So what we often find is companies that are making decisions on moving to a software as a service platform are doing so in a bubble. And what does that mean? What that means is they're not taking into consideration all the different components that go into the infrastructure of IT at a law firm. So for example, let's say everything was in-house and you owned all of your equipment in-house, and you were going to allow people to start using Macs, because there are some law firms that are really pushing the Macs and the whole bring your own device movement. Now, you can't just allow someone to bring a Mac into your environment until you understand, is it secure? Will they be able to even access the applications and the data and the software that they need? So there are other implications to what that would look like. If they change the security structure, will that affect the Windows devices that are currently being accessed? So when you compare that to software as a service, there are a few different components that general high-level components that come into play with IT infrastructure. You have your end user devices, laptops, tablets, desktops, your phones. You have your server infrastructure that hosts a lot of your data and your software. And then there's the actual software. Those are kind of your three major components. And obviously there's lots of pieces in between there. So what we often find is someone says, oh, I'm currently using ABC document management solution, and I'm due for an upgrade. And I'm getting a good convincing argument from the salesperson to move to their software as a service model. So typically it's, let's just focus on this piece of software and whether this piece of software would be better for us to go in the cloud or keep internally. The challenge there is, 5 years ago, that might have been okay. Today, as most of you know, the cloud model, whether you go private cloud or some other format, the more pieces you put in the cloud, the more confusing it is as to how you're going to manage it. So what that, where I'm getting with that comment is, if you don't understand what you're going to do with your servers, what you're going to do with your desktops, your end user devices, it's hard to make a decision on just software. So if you decide to move your document management system to the cloud, yet you haven't made a decision to move your other applications to the cloud, and you're just going to keep that local, when you look at the numbers, you're going to end up spending a lot more money. So the key is making sure you just understand the complete situation and how one decision affects another. Similarly, we find that software as a service is not evaluated typically the proper way. If someone is evaluating a managed service provider to come on site and manage their equipment, they've been conditioned to ask certain questions. I find that if people are looking at a private cloud solution, they've been more conditioned to ask certain questions. And towards the end, I have a full list of questions that you're going to make sure you want to ask. What I find is a lot of people that are moving to software as a service figure that if it's available on a browser, well, it must be okay. They don't ask about the backup procedures. They don't ask about the support that's available. They don't ask about the SLAs and how quickly they can get support from someone. they don't ask a lot of the questions. They really focus on, is the functionality of that piece of software going to fit our needs for that, that type of software that we need? The document management solution. Can we click here and share that? Can we collaborate properly? It's not really about the rest of it. Is the data center hosting your data in another country outside of the US? What are the security protocols that they have in place? What's the disaster recovery plan for that software as a service vendor? So there's a lot of questions here, and again, you're going to have a full list of them, but we find that when it comes to software as a service, people are not evaluating them like they would other IT decisions. Customer support can become very resource intensive when working with software as a service. There's a new role out there that's called service broker. So some internal IT people have been turned into, they used to be the network administrator or help desk, and they were touching a lot of machines, but a lot of that stuff is now moving towards the cloud. They spend a lot of their time talking with customer service at 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 different companies, and it becomes very intensive because they're not talking and communicating to each other. Security can be a risk, and I'm not saying it always is, but it's important to understand what your risk tolerance is, what compliances are most important to you, and where you believe your ethical obligations need to be in order to properly protect your firm and your client's data. And I mentioned about the SLA, that's the service level. That is, if I'm working at home at 10 p.m., am I going to be able to call someone and get support? If I call someone and have an issue today, how quickly will they have to get back to me? Can I call and actually get a person on the phone, or am I going to be pushed into a voicemail that I have to leave? Do I have to open a ticket on a system before I can actually get support? With the level that I paid for, am I actually going to get support with that, or do I have to pay every time? Those are really important questions that you need to ask and understand. Talked about data may not reside in the US, and I know for a lot of firms that's a major concern. And one of the big risks that we see as well is when it comes to software as a service, because they are one piece of software for many, many different clients, when an upgrade, an update comes out, they're automatically applied. That can be a pro and a con. And so it's just important to understand that risk and your risk tolerance. So the pro is you don't have to have someone running around to each computer and touching each machine and doing updates. Right? The con is your staff is so used to the system working a certain way, if they go ahead and make an update before your team has an opportunity to train or understand what the new changes are or make sure it fits in the workflow as you want to work, you may be forced to change your workflow. And that may cause a decrease in productivity for a period of time, depending on how big the update is. Data ownership is an important factor. Who actually owns the data? Can you take it out? And how can you take it out? Lock-in becomes a big issue where once you're invested in a piece of software that is a software as a service, it's pretty hard to move. It becomes very expensive to move. The export and import process into a new solution isn't very seamless. And so it's important to understand that you are committing for a period of time to be able to use a system, and that it would be pretty expensive to move it in most situations. Now, the integration with other systems, this is something that is definitely changing, and you see more and more integration happening between systems, but it's important to know if the system that you're going to choose does have integration with the other systems that you need it to. And when it comes to who's going to manage it, software as a service is typically more of a do-it-yourself type of solution. Configure yourself, maintain yourself, other than the back end, of course, which is what that company does. But if you need it to be set up a certain way, you're either going to pay a consultant, you're going to pay that vendor, or you're just going to do that yourself. I'm not saying that software as a service is not the way to go. But those are some important risks that you need to think about if you are looking at 1, 2, or 5 different software as a service providers. So one of the objectives here today that I promised is I wanted to talk about a private cloud and a private cloud example. And as I mentioned earlier, a private cloud is a segregated area, single tenant, just for your particular firm. Within that solution, now there are a few different flavors depending on the company you go with. Within that solution, and I can talk from the experience of what I've seen, you have your servers that are virtual, and in most private cloud examples, you're going to get a virtual desktop scenario, desktop as a service, or it's been called other terms. The idea of desktop as a service is to have a virtual version of Windows with all of your applications, all of your data, secured in this private cloud environment, in the same environment as the servers. So it should be fast. It should be quite secure. The ability to maintain and update, add new, and secure that environment is much easier when it's in a virtual environment, sitting in a data center versus sitting on everyone's individual machine that someone has to go and touch. Whether you have 10 users, 500, or 1,000, it can get very tedious for an individual to go and touch each machine. So the typical setup is hosted servers, hosted individualized, personalized Windows desktops. From what we've seen, they are typically a normal version of Windows with the same software that you're using today, the same data access that you have today, the same ability to customize Windows that you have today, but with some security parameters put on that are much easier to apply. For example, you can't take data from your virtual desktop to your local machine, or only these individuals can, but these individuals cannot. The amount of data that you're able to store, the websites that you're able to go to, the access of data you're able to get to. It's a much easier and much more flexible system when it's controlled in that type of environment. It's a much more dedicated and secure environment for a private cloud. So for example, if you wanted to implement two-factor authentication, and for those of you that might not know that specific term, I'm sure you've seen it if you've gone to your bank's website and they say, hey, you've never used this computer before, I'm going to text you a code, give me that code before you can get in. That type of technology is built into some private cloud services, and it's just another level of security. But those types of things are hard to implement if you're in a document management solution that's software as a service and you're the only company asking for it. They're not going to implement it just for you. They really have to implement it all clients across the board, or at least have it available for everyone. So having ability to have your own environment, kind of like private cloud is very similar to having everything in your office in that same what they call client server environment, client being the end user device, server obviously being where the applications and data are stored, and just taking that similar environment and pushing it up to the cloud in a data center that's not in your office. Typically, backup and disaster recovery is included. When you have your systems on-premise in your office, you have some sort of backup that's happening. Hopefully, you're taking that data off-site somehow, whether moving it to the cloud, to the lowest level of someone taking home a tape or some sort of external hard drive every night. Typically with private cloud services, backup and disaster recovery is just a no-brainer. It's part of the solution. You're backing up one data center to another, and it's not extra cost as it is likely now. Easy and secure remote access. When you have a service that has Windows desktops that are virtualized, you should be able to get to those as long as you have internet on almost any device. I've seen it work on smartphones, the phablets that are out there, the tablets. I've seen it work on laptops, desktops, Mac, and Windows devices. And as long as you have a solid internet connection, I've seen it work perfectly fine. I use a virtualized Windows desktop. I access it on the train using my hotspot from my phone. I can sit in Starbucks and have access, or most random Wi-Fi's in the airport or wherever that are out there. Private clouds give firms the ability to reduce having hardware. So there's a reduction of all or most of the physical servers, and with physical servers and physical desktops comes the cost of maintaining them. So I've had people say to me before, I can go to the store and buy a $700 desktop. Someone spends a couple hours in setting it up, and that thing's good until it dies. And the truth of the matter is, to have a proper, secure, and optimized environment, to have the user of that machine to be as productive as possible, that machine needs to be maintained, updated on an ongoing basis, everything from antivirus to Windows and Microsoft patches, to be consistent across the board. There's a lot of effort that goes into the maintenance. Even if you have internal IT people, if they're spending their time doing that instead of, strategically helping with, let's say, the workflow of the document management solution and enhancing it to save someone, 5 minutes or 10 clicks, that's going to help the firm much more than having these desktops that they need to walk around and maintain. Vendor management, most private cloud providers will help with vendor management. Not all of them do, but it's an important factor to ask and find out about. And then most private cloud providers will provide a complete support package, both tactical from the help desk to maintaining those patches and those systems to helping with new users come on board to the strategic, working with internal IT or being your IT wholly that would help you with the strategic decisions of different pieces of software to go to, if you're going to get involved with a merger or acquisition, if you're bringing on a whole bunch of new people. There's a lot of factors that go into those things other than, hey, let's just buy someone a machine and get them up and running. And then hardware and licensing. Some and not all private cloud providers will rent some of that hardware. So instead of desktops, you can get, let's say, thin clients. It used to be called dumb terminals. We've seen them called smart monitors, zero clients. It's a similar concept. There's no physical computer. And some companies will rent those to you, so you can be more of an operating expense, more of IT as a service, similar with licensing. Some of those providers will provide you with a significant amount of licensing. Usually they don't provide licensing for software specific to your business, for example, that document management software, but maybe something like Microsoft's licensing or antivirus licensing, those types of licensing. It'd be nice to just have one company take care of that for you. Cost savings is always a factor that comes up in these conversations. What I typically find is when I've worked with law firms and compared going with multiple software as a service vendors versus moving to a private cloud model, 90% of the time I've seen a savings going with the private cloud. There's definitely a savings, if you're sticking with on-premise equipment versus private cloud. But the idea is when you can consolidate a lot of these things, instead of having a different vendor for backup and a different vendor for disaster recovery, and you have to buy the licensing on your own, buy the hardware on your own, and have different aspects of labor, whether internal or external or a combination thereof. When you combine all of that typically into one place and one vendor, it's hard not to have a cost savings. So the question is private cloud right for your firm? And there are some things to think about and some good questions to ask yourself. Do you want to go to an operating expense model and have less CapEx? Are you comfortable with having more of IT as a service versus having internal IT go to Amazon and rent a server on your own that they have to manage everything with? Are you open to the possibility of reducing your staff? Now, it's not in every scenario, but we have seen some situations where individuals that are on staff just to support servers aren't needed anymore, or they're needed in a different capacity. They can focus more on the software side. So it's a possible reduction, a possible change on who you go to for support. Dedicated secure environment, is that a necessity and is that a concern for your firm? This is a no-brainer. It's very rare that I talk to someone, especially in a law firm, that says that we want to keep our servers on site. Most people understand that that's an inherent security risk and just aren't interested in that anymore. Is easy and secure remote access something that is important to you? Do you want less vendors to manage and have that consolidation? Are you comfortable with the disaster recovery that you have in place today? Now, there's two main factors we talk about with disaster recovery. And you might be thinking to yourself, disaster will never happen to us. But we all know that they do happen. That could be a flood in your office. That can be a power surge that comes through to your office and blows some of the machines. There's significant factors and other things that can happen. When it comes to disaster recovery, the two questions you need to ask yourself, your internal IT, your external IT vendor, is if there's a disaster and my server crashes, how quickly can I get back up and running? And how much data can I possibly lose? Those are the two most important things that you need to understand, because if your IT service, if your IT partner or your internal IT can't tell you or show you exactly how quickly you'll get back up and running and what the max loss exposure is for the amount of data you can lose, you have a concern on your hand. And you need to find that out, whether private cloud is something you're looking at or not. Are you concerned with the number of IT people you have on your staff or outsourced, and you want a wider range of expertise that you can reach to? Typically, private cloud providers, have that type of support, versus a software as a service provider where they're really only going to know their products. They may know how it integrates with different other products, but most of the time you're going to get support from them just for their specific product. Typically, private cloud providers are more of a overall IT shop that can support you in many different ways across the board. And typically, private cloud is going to be a flat fee model. Not all of them are, but typically the ones that we see and what we talk about are the flat fee models. So are your IT costs out of control? Is it hard for you to budget year over year? Those are some reasons why private cloud might be a good solution for you. So that's really focused on the cloud, the private cloud side. And there's some typical questions that if you're thinking about a change, and this isn't just about a change to the cloud, but you're thinking about a change different from maybe the last time you had a change, some of the things that you need to think about. Do you have the right people on your team, whether that's internal or outside of your organization? And the number one thing that I would think about is strategic versus firefighter. I put IT people in two categories, and I am an IT person. I'm a computer science guy, so I get it. Are they firefighters? And these are very important people. But are they firefighters, meaning that they come in for the day, they have a list of people that had issues, they have a list of things that they need to do that were broken, they have very tactical things that they need to handle for the day. Typically, those individuals are not the ones that are going to sit back and talk strategy with you. And I'm always asked, how do you know the difference? This doesn't work every single time, but majority of the time, if you talk to an IT person, and depending on the size of your organization or the organization that you're outsourcing to, if you can sit down with them and talk as an executive and talk about your business initiatives and talk about your revenue of where you're at and where you want to be, talk about the number of people you have, the number of lawyers you have, the number of locations you have, and where you want to be. And they're going to help you put together a strategy to get there from their standpoint. Obviously, there's other factors. If they are not underneath a desk constantly, if they are not as hands-on as maybe some of the firefighters, you have more of an executive level person. If they're coming to you and saying, you know what, I was doing some research and I found this new piece of software out there that law firms are using, and I really think that would be better than ABC software we're using today, and here's why. You have a strategic individual and a strategic partner. What are your clients demanding? This is an important question that I ask every lawyer or law firm administrator that I sit down with. And what I'm hearing is they're demanding audits. They're demanding that they're not only doing good work, but they're doing it more efficiently, that 5 people don't need to be involved unless they really have to. And we're finding that some of the bigger companies are actually requiring certain type of security from their law firm. They're getting deep into where are you storing the data? Who has access to it? And they're vetting out those companies to determine which law firm they're going to work with. Because I think we all can agree that there's no shortage of lawyers. Now, there are some law firms that have different specialties, depending on if you want someone local or not. But there's a lot of law firms out there, and there are firms that are more agile, that are more efficient, that are using technology, that are allowing clients some insight, whether that's a simple extranet, a website that they can log into with a username and password and share files, see their invoices, have some sort of interaction that they may be used to. I had a lawyer tell me the other day, just last week, that one of the reasons why they wanted to talk to me is one of their clients said to one of their lawyers, "Hey, I need to send you over a file." And the lawyer said, "Sure, email it to me." Didn't hear from the guy for days, and just found out the other day that he was fired. The lawyer was fired. And when he got a hold of the previous client and asked him why, he said, "I'm about to send you all the financial information for my company and some of my IP information that's extremely secure to me, and you just want me to email it to you? You don't have a secure portal? You don't have an encryption email system? You don't have a way to protect my data? I can't work with you. I'm not comfortable." So we're seeing a lot of those clients' demands. I don't know what your clients are demanding, but it's an important consideration. What are the plans for the firm? What does the growth look like? Are you expanding to different geographic areas? Are you looking at an M&A, some sort of merger or acquisition with other groups? Are you expanding into different quote-unquote specialty areas? Those are important factors to understand to determine what type of technology can support you to reach those goals. A lot of people ask me, how do I really know what the right solution is? And this one question, this one statement is a way that seems to be a light bulb moment for a lot of people. You have services like Amazon or Rackspace, and I use those examples because they're big and everyone knows them. Amazon and Rackspace are services you manage. Those are services that an IT person are going to go to the site, they're going to pick out exactly what they want, they're going to host a server for you, whether it's private or dedicated or shared, whatever that might look like, and they're going to have to do the patching, the updating, the support for that system. A managed service, which is typically more of the private cloud world, is a service that you outsource that type of support so you can focus on other things. So it's a question of, do you want a service that is a managed service that you can outsource those components, or do you want just another service that you manage? And obviously determining what type of cloud is the best for your firm, whether that's software as a service in the public cloud or a private cloud. So I'm going to run through some of these here. You'll be able to get this information afterwards, but here are some of the questions and the considerations when you're looking at a vendor. The type of cloud, is it software as a service? Is it private cloud? What's the reputation of that company? How long have they been in business? A lot of these cloud vendors are very, very new to the market, and they're using their current clients as testing out the solutions that they have. What's the service level agreement? How quickly are they going to be able to support you? What's the financial stability of that company? Are they going to be around a year from now or 3 years from now? And what happens if they aren't? What are the security protocols that they utilize? How do you know that it's real? Are they certified? Do they have certifications that they can prove to you? Who owns the data? What are they doing for backups? So there's the backup process and then local backups. So there are companies that will provide a backup back to you at your facility so you have a copy of your data, or send it somewhere else outside of them so that you would be able to have that data in your control. What does the staff look like? What is the makeup of that particular environment? With the internet and marketing nowadays, it's pretty easy to make yourself look like a really, really large company, and it's important to ask those questions. So the question is, how do you take this information and how do you figure out what your strategy is? Here's my no-brainer. Make some time. You got to set aside some time to really think through this, just like you would for a client and thinking through the strategy of how you're going to help them. Involve executive leadership. And then oftentimes, unless you truly have that strategic individual in-house, IT may not be the right people to be in that initial conversation. Sometimes answering the questions about where the firm's going to go and what that's going to look like is better at the executive level. Understanding your refresh strategy. How often do you replace desktops? How often do you replace servers? Do you automatically replace them every 5 years? Do you wait until they die? Do you wait until they're out of warranty? What does that look like? Because that will give you an idea of that whole picture. If you know that next year you need to spend $100,000 on equipment, now's a pretty good time to figure out how to avoid that, if moving to the cloud and a service makes sense for you. And similarly, understanding that true total cost of ownership. It's not just about what you pay on a monthly basis. It's looking at it over a period of time and understanding all the different pieces that you wouldn't be paying for anymore with that service. So if you go to software as a service, maybe that's one less server, maybe it's one less employee that you have, possibly. You move to a private cloud environment, maybe they include antivirus and you're no longer buying it yourself. They include Microsoft Office licensing, so you're no longer buying it, yourself. But it's really important to understand all those factors so you really know if it's going to cost you more or less. Discovery and due diligence, as important as it is that you would say to your clients that you need to do these things to give them the proper recommendation, it's important that you do the same on your side. And utilizing someone that knows what they're talking about is very important. What we find today, and one of the issues we see today, is IT people that haven't done anything in the cloud are trying to figure out what's best without going to professionals that are already doing cloud, maybe have done hundreds of implementations and utilizing some of their advice.